This conference will now be recorded.
So everybody on board, we can start?
Absolutely.
Start off. We'll learn lessons from this, but it's great to be back with all of you here. And this is indeed the next session where we're introducing the gift of feedback this time in a series where we really focus on developing wise and responsible leaders. If we do have some time at the end, I will share with you the progress we've made with the Cornerstone Leadership Academy. And so we actually, within that academy, basically decide to focus on developing this wise and responsible leadership framework. Now, feedback. First of all, and I'm going to click here. What are actually the pain points when we talk about feedback? What are the pain points that feedback may address as a solution for the leader on one side and for the organization on the other side? So for the individual leader, questions that we may ask ourselves, and I think I did at least, is how do I know that I'm actually doing the right thing? How do I know how my boss, my peers, my subordinates actually rate my performance at this point? How do I find out my blind spots? Because sometimes other people observe things from us that we don't observe ourselves, and these are the so-called blind spots in our behavior. How do I know where I can further develop myself as a basic question? And also, how can I give feedback to my boss without actually risking that relationship? Because sometimes we are afraid of giving real honest feedback because we feel a little bit worried about the retaliation that we may get or the impact it will have on our relationship. When I look at the organization, we have similar questions. So first of all, how do we ensure the right behaviors are shown that really align with our culture? I recently talked, for instance, to one CEO that said, I don't want any more blaming in my organization. Now, this is one of these behaviors that you really, if that's part of your culture, and it should be, then what can you do to get rid of that behavior of blaming? How do we ensure that teams timely adjust their tactics to achieve the desired results? Do we wait until it's the end of the year or end of the quarter to then say, okay, sorry, but we missed the result, or are we going to go faster on that? How do we build trust and respect in the organization for each other deeply? How do we ensure engagement and motivation of the people by actually helping them develop? I think in my previous webinar, I talked about 3 big motivators of people that are basically, one of them is mastery, and mastery is about really developing. Given an equal pay, if people can learn a lot of new things and develop themselves in a certain organization, the likelihood is there that they will prefer that organization given the equal pay. And then we have the final question for organization. Again, how do we stop blaming and have people really take ownership over the project and the actions they have to take? So these are just some of the pain points that I believe all of us have experienced or are asking sometimes ourselves, whether as a leader or whether as a whole organization. What is the solution to find an answer to these questions? And actually, it's not so complicated. It's really being good at giving and receiving feedback. And organizations that have been very good at installing feedback as a habit on their teams, they typically score much higher on answering these questions of these pain points that we have defined on the previous slide. So what are the benefits? I mean, the benefits are probably just the flip side, the rewards. First of all, we know that we do the right things at the right time. We will have a good scorecard at all times, so we know where we are. We understand how others observe us, and we minimize conflict and improve collaboration as a result. We do know where we can improve and how if we get feedback constantly. And actually, the funny thing is, by having the courage to give feedback to each other, you do build more trusted relations with your colleagues and your boss. At the same time, when we look at the organization, you would typically build a very strong and performing culture. You avoid disaster when you don't give feedback if you see that the result will be off, and you make sure that the result is timely. You increase transparency and trust, strengthen ownership taking, and strengthen motivation and engagement. So really, feedback as a mechanism, as a tactic in an organization or as a habit is extremely powerful to do just all these things and ensure you have a high-performing culture with a lot of trust and transparency throughout the organization. And yet, when I look at many of the clients we've had and continue to work with, feedback seems so difficult to install as a habit, and especially some of the cultures worldwide are more prone to give feedback than others, but still it's difficult for everyone. Just want to have a quick look here at whether there's a question, maybe not, I don't see it right now. Okay. So here we have with the pain point, the solution is feedback, and then the benefits and the rewards that actually feedback will provide to us. Is there anyone maybe wants to add a thought or a question already at this point? Otherwise, I continue with giving some insight in how we really look at giving good feedback and installing feedback. No, I will continue.
Peter, I have a question. It's Laurie.
Sorry?
You know, so in the program, you are selling people or giving them the reasons why they would participate in this active feedback, and then is a part of it that they learn how to do that and become comfortable with that? Is that how what gets achieved with this? If we follow through with you.
Show how important it is, Laurie. And then in the program, which I'm going to present to you in a summary, we give them the tools to get there.
Okay, so if we wanted to, so you could train somebody in our region, to do this with people.
Yeah, so I will share with you at the end of the presentation that we are now up and running with our also online learning site. And there is a 20-module leading change program available. And now we will have also an 8-module giving feedback and receiving feedback module. So on one side, there is e-learning, which is available via video learning with all the same tools and a quiz and articles, reading, whatever. But we will also offer training and mentorship. So the idea is that people do the video learning, then we are available to do an online webinar with them in terms of some kind of team facilitation or individual facilitation. And there is obviously also the possibility to just do global virtual online training, but then live. Does that answer your question? Laurie? Hello?
I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute. Yes, it does. Thank you. I'm sorry to disrupt the meeting.
That's okay. So again, a few stages. All these things that we've mentioned as being pain points and also benefits and rewards are also, there's evidence for that. There is a lot of research on that. And some of the sources are, for instance, again, Harvard Business Review, where they say 58% of people trust strangers, but only 42% trust their own boss. And it's actually related to the ability to give feedback or the boss asking feedback. 43% of highly engaged employees receive feedback at least once a week. This is Gallup as a source. Employees whose managers regularly communicate with them have nearly 3 times or are nearly 3 times more engaged than those managers who don't regularly communicate. And finally, when we look at the younger generation that enters the workforce, 63% of Gen Z said they actually want to hear timely, constructive performance feedback throughout the year. This was a study made by Ernst & Young. There's a lot of evidence for that. Now, here I go into the actual program. I share with you how we approach giving feedback. What is some of the structure or the tools that we can apply? And we say actually that there is a trick to provide great feedback. And that trick is actually an acronym for 4 words. That is, it's timely, it's done with regulated emotion, it's integrity-based, and we'll explain what that means. And fourth, it has to be constructive. And so before we're going to go through them one by one and share some ideas, some tools that we can apply to actually make this happen. The trick to give feedback as a gift. Timely. Timely actually refers to simply at the right time. It doesn't mean giving immediate feedback to people. And sometimes we forget that, especially when we're very emotional. But at the right
Peter,
time, again, not
Peter,
immediate. Yes?
let me interrupt 1 second. I'm going to mute everybody and then give it back to you, okay?
Okay, no problem. Okay, great. Now you should be able to hear me.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So it means not immediately, but also not too late. If you observe a behavior that you don't like, or if somebody, for instance, has been blaming others, you don't wait for a couple of weeks to give that feedback. So you don't have to do it on the spot, but you give it the right time to give feedback. It definitely doesn't mean once a year. And I think some companies, I believe also companies like Google, they really go away from annual performance reviews. Because first of all, the annual performance review is typically either a time to say next year you won't be there, or a time to say positive things, but very few people give actually constructive feedback to the employees. And you really don't want to hear at the end of the year that the boss was not happy already the whole year, but now I'm going to tell you at the end that you're not going to get your bonus. So definitely you want to do it timely, and this is what this is about. The second thing is that it has to be based on regulated emotions. And so actually, the question here is that we have two strategies or two tactics. And these strategies, in order to control our emotions, is on one side, we call it cognitive reappraisal. What does it mean? It means that when we give feedback, before we give the feedback, we really have to put it in our mind that this is something we do to help the other person. That this is really something we do to help develop, to do it as a gift to this person. And it's not something that we really perceive as extremely negative. And it's by having that mindset before we give feedback that actually it can positively impact our own emotions. So really positioning it as a gift. And the second is what we call expressive suppression. That means we will always have emotions, especially when we're angry about something, but it's really about controlling our behaviors. We cannot control the behaviors or the emotion of the person we talk to, but we should be able to control our behaviors that we show to the other party. And it is these two strategies combined that will ultimately help us to be more emotionally regulated when having a feedback conversation. Because frankly, if we show anger, for sure, the emotions on the other side will even become worse. And sometimes small things in our body language can ignite really a very bad emotion from the other side. And then there is an escalation, which is not possible to stop anymore. So again, we can go deeper, but for the sake of this webinar, I just want to share that there are two tactics, two strategies that we can apply to actually better control our emotions and feedback. One is positioning it as a gift. Second is controlling our own, at least behaviors, even though the emotions are still inside. And then an important question that we should always ask ourselves is, how would I respond if another person approached me in the way I am going to approach that person I'm giving feedback to? It's a very basic question, but I think it can help us reflect on, am I doing the right thing here? Do I really show the right emotion, the right approach when I give feedback to this other person? So a few simple things to, again, make sure our emotions are regulated when giving feedback. The third one is of the trick, so TRIC, the I is integrity-based. Now, what does this really mean? Well, in very simple terms, it means that when we give feedback, we shouldn't lie to ourselves and we shouldn't lie to the person that we give feedback to. Meaning to say, if you actually don't give feedback, but you want to put on the scorecard of this person that he's not done a great job, and actually the idea is that after this feedback, I'm writing him an email and it will be the first step for firing this person, then when we don't mention anything about the process, that would not be with full integrity. So the integrity means that we honestly, sincerely give feedback in order to help the other person. We really want to do this because we see deviations from what we expect. We see deviations in behavior compared to our culture, and we really want to get this person on board. So we're going to give continuous feedback to make that happen, to help develop that other person. That's exactly what we mean with integrity based. So the way I present it as a gift, what I say to this person is aligned with my thinking that I really want to help the other person that we give the feedback to. But I've frankly also seen and experienced other things in this respect that are not really integrity based. And the result is that actually people do know when you're playing some kind of political game and actually not really telling honestly what this feedback is about. And now we're coming to the actual core of the program, and that is to talk about constructive feedback. So also, well, maybe one more thing I should add here, sorry I forgot, but is, again, I already mentioned what is your intention. So is it really integrity based? Is it really developing the others? But also sometimes, and that's something we're not always thinking about, but we shouldn't blame the process. What do I mean with that? Sometimes when we give feedback, we say things like, you know, John, I have to give you feedback, but you know, I actually don't want to do that, but my boss also asked me to give it to you, or, you know, our HR process requires us to give you this feedback, or, you know, once a year we do have to give you a performance review, although I personally don't really want to do it. This is, of course, nonsense. You give feedback because you want to really, again, help the other person. And it's not about the process. It's not about what you should do because your boss asked you to do. So you don't blame the process. You do it because honestly, you want to help that other person. So going on, we're talking about constructive feedback. And that's really the core, because here we're going to install, the first ones were all more reflections, but I think the last part of being constructive feedback is really where we're giving the tools to make it happen. And what are these? So what does it mean actually constructive? And there are many different definitions and theories, but how we see it is, first of all, and this I think is very simple and very powerful, but it has to be based on core behavioral descriptions. And I will explain to you exactly what that means and give you examples for that. The second one is you have to practice active listening. And the coaches among us will be more familiar with that than others, but we can give you some basics about that. And it has to happen, or it better happens, during a structured conversation with a good balance. And now we're going to go one by one to each of these lines to see how do we really give constructive feedback? How do we observe and mention these core behavioral descriptions? How do we practice active listening? How do we structure the conversation? And how do we keep good balance? And we actually have a template that we use during the training where people can structure and work on a feedback situation, applying that template and these 4 different steps in it. So again, core behavior, what does it really mean? And you will see it is extremely simple, but very powerful to at least start the feedback on the right footage. Core means, first, contextual. It means that when I observe that behavior of the other person, and behavior can be in a very broad sense, it can be a decision that was made, a behavior that you show during a meeting, simply not delivering the results on time is also a way of a behavior. So it is very broad, but it has to be clearly defined in time and place. That is contextual. I'll give you an example of that. Second is it has to be observable, meaning to say also it's also not hearsay, and it's not something that is related to a feeling, like I feel that you are tired or I feel that you're not motivated. No, it has to be an observable behavior. You cannot actually tell other people how they feel. You can know how you feel, but you shouldn't put that in the mouth of somebody else that you give feedback to. So I observe the behavior and can relate commonly accepted facts to it. And finally, it's always good to show or to share what is the result, what is the impact of that behavior that I have observed at a certain time or a certain place. So the behavior that you show has a result for myself or for other people, other stakeholders. An example, very simple example, is during the meeting on the 5th July in our office, I observed that you did not bring the required report and did not have the financial analysis prepared. And as a result, I could not submit the full business plan on time. So the simple statement has these 3 dimensions all clearly defined. There is a specific place, specific time, there is a behavior that I observed, and there is an impact that that behavior has on myself or on the organization. What it does is that if you have that core behavior clear, is that it's much more difficult for the person you give feedback to start arguing the validity of it. And also it helps to, again, make a factual validated statement that you can then build on to get replies and response from the people that you give feedback to. Give you a few examples, and unfortunately now my screen, I should try to move that a little bit so I can read myself. I think you don't listen or are not interested because you always look somewhere else. And we're not going to unmute, but it's some of these things that I would like to give the teams that we train and say, do you feel that this is aligned with the core feedback observations that we've just defined? Is this a core statement? And the reality is, of course, not, because first, I think you don't listen is something not factual, is something I believe, I feel, and I put in my feeling that you are probably not interested because you always look somewhere else. Another example is, if I can go through it, yeah. I notice that you don't look at people when they are talking to you. This is getting close, but it's still missing, for instance, the impact. So if I make that statement, I notice that you don't look at people when they're talking to you, that's fine, but what does it mean? So why do you give me that feedback? So you want to add an impact that that behavior has for you or for the people that you're addressing. This afternoon, when we met with the sales team, you often did not keep eye-to-eye contact when your colleagues spoke, and as a result, they may feel you're not interested in their presentation. Now here we're getting to the core statement, because there is a specific context. Is this afternoon when we met with the sales team, I saw a behavior that I want to give feedback on, because you often did not keep eye-to-eye contact when your colleague spoke. I'm not saying that you're not interested. I'm not saying that you're tired or you're not motivated. I'm just saying that you don't keep eye-to-eye contact. And then I give you the impact, because as a result, people may feel that you're not interested. I'm not saying how you feel, but we can all understand that if that happens to you, you may feel that way. And it's a legitimate expression that you can have. So again, if I compare these 3 statements, the last one is probably closer to the actual real core good statement that we want to build the feedback on. This to say, again, very important. And that's why also when we talked about timely, sometimes we need some time to build this core statement. But if we have it right, or if we have 2 or 3 of these core statements, it is very powerful to start giving constructive feedback to the other person. But sometimes our emotions bring us more to the first sentence, like, I think you don't listen and you're not interested, because that's how I feel and I want to share that with you. But it's probably better if we keep these emotions down and we start with the 3rd statement, which is much less emotional and also bringing emotions out of the other person we give feedback to. Okay, then let's talk about the second part of constructive feedback. And this is about active listening. Now, again, active listening is a program in itself, But in the context of feedback, we just give some overview of what we consider as dimensions that are critical to be really actively listening while you give constructive feedback. So first of all, there is the idea of a focused presence. So really, when I see somebody giving feedback and meanwhile on his mobile phone texting somebody else or in a WhatsApp and say sorry, or taking a call and saying sorry, now you got to give me a minute because I need to take this call, it's very urgent, that's not the right way to have focused presence and give good constructive feedback to somebody else. The second thing is non-judgmental, right? And this is very difficult because we may already be biased and say, you're an underperformer, you're not doing a good job. And when I listen to you, I'm actually not really listening to you. I'm just going to listen to what confirms to me that you have, a bad performance or you can't do the job. The other one is really ask a lot of open questions. I mean, don't say, for instance, are you motivated or are you not motivated? Yes or no. You would add, why do you don't have eye contact with the other people? Can you share with me what's going on? This is an open question where, again, you get a lot of information back from the people we give feedback to. And the fourth dimension for being active listening is always continuously paraphrase and clarify. So basically say in your own words what you have heard from the other person, clarify a statement, whether you really understand the true meaning of what this other person tries to say. But if we, and again, in the context of training, we would go through examples, we would do some role play, we would give some exercises, but you would have basically these four dimensions that we need to show when we do active listening. And I tell you, it's probably the toughest part of the program, because every time, especially frankly, you go more and more senior in the organization, it's very difficult for people to listen. We come into feedback with a certain opinion, we don't hear what we want to hear as a reply from the other person, and we start giving our opinion. Listening stops. So it's sometimes a real eye-opener also for people to say, when you put them in a role play and others observe them, and then you ask, how much percentage of the time have you actually listened versus talking? It's like 70-80% talking, 20-30% listening, and it should be the opposite. So active listening. Then about open questions within active listening, I also want to mention, because sometimes we don't realize that we're already judging in our questions the other person. Some examples is, you can say, why is this a failure? Why didn't we achieve the result? This is different. So how do you feel about the result? And what do we learn from this? It's a different way of putting the same question, but it's more of a learning question versus judging somebody else. What's wrong, right? We already say something is wrong versus on a scale from 0 to 10, how good do you feel about this? And maybe you come to the conclusion that it's wrong yourself, which is then more powerful to give feedback on. Whose fault is this? So there's already something to blame, but it may be the process to blame. It may not be the person to blame. So another question could be, who takes ownership over this? And let's have a conversation about that. So again, we also walk through what kind of open questions are good questions and what kind of open questions actually get you probably more into trouble and again raise the emotions during the feedback. Then the last part, and again, the coaches will see this very clearly, but it's funny how actually a coaching conversation can also apply to giving really good constructive feedback. And the only thing we got to do is use the same structured conversation that you would have as a model in coaching, but turn the reality before the goal. And I'll share with you why. So you use a growth structure for structuring your feedback conversation, but you start with the reality. And the reality is actually your core statement. So you start a conversation by giving this core statement. John, Jane, the last meeting, July 7, I observed that you did not have face-to-face contact. And as a result, I feel that the people that we're presenting did not really feel respected. How do you feel about that? Or how do you feel about this observation? So this is the reality where we start from. Then we can say, okay, so what should we change and how can we achieve that? So what would be a more appropriate behavior, and how do you feel about that, and how can we achieve that? So that's the goal we try to achieve of the feedback. And the other question is, how do we then get there? What are some of the things you can change for yourself, or how can we help you to achieve the desired behavior? And finally, and that's sometimes where we forget to ask the question, but is the question about now we know the options, we know the goal, how we want to get there, but how is your commitment? And the question to ask for how is your commitment is typically, for instance, so when can we review this? On a scale from 0 to 10, how sure are you that this is not going to happen again in the next meeting? Or if it does happen again, what would be the consequence? What is a fair consequence in your view? So these are the kind of will questions to make sure there is a commitment on the table that this behavior is not reoccurring. But having this kind of structured conversation, and if we prepare it well with just 3-4 questions, can be again very simple but powerful to have a good feedback conversation with the other person. And we have some cards prepared. I don't want to walk you through all of it, but some cards where we have questions that could be relevant or examples for each of these different parts of the structured conversation. So for instance, when we talk about reality, how do you feel about this behavior today? How does this behavior affect you and all of us? On a scale from 0 to 10, how do you feel about the result and why? For the goal, so what behavior should you show? What is the impact of the behavior you would like to see on your team? What is the result we should achieve? So again, for each of these 4 dimensions of the structured feedback conversation, we give some examples of questions that you can apply. And then again, when you get a mini case to work on a mini case for feedback, you could use your template and these questions to really do better at structuring your conversation for feedback. Let's continue. Okay. The last part of the constructive conversation, feedback conversation, is that it has to be balanced, right? So what does it mean to be balanced? Actually, it means that sometimes it's also great to refer to the big picture, because you can talk about a specific behavior and context, but it's also great if you can relate it to the overall, for instance, culture of the company and why this behavior is important for the culture of the company, or why this particular observation has a very strong impact on the overall budget or result, and what does it mean for the team, for the organization. So this big picture can be very powerful also to relate to. And especially we talk about during the conversation, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if there is ugly. But it's also good to start a bit with the good and make people at ease, lower the emotions again by talking about the good before we go into the bad. And the last part, and this is also extremely powerful, is that you don't only give feedback, but you also ask feedback. So when you're talking to subordinates or to peers and you give them feedback about your observations, it is always very good at the end of the conversation to say, well, I really appreciate that you listened to me and I appreciate the conversation we had. And by the way, while we're sitting here anyway together, I'm really open for you to give me some feedback also. If you have observations that you want to talk about, I'm really very interested to hear that. So it's this exchange of feedback that is very powerful, especially I found, again, in, for instance, an Asian context where people may be more reserved to open up and give that feedback. When the boss asks to give feedback and really sits quietly and says, I'm here to listen to you, it can be extremely powerful to build trust and learn a lot of new things about ourselves and get these blind spots out. So a balanced, structured conversation. Let me just have a look here. Yeah, so my question to you would be then, if you see these 4 different statements, which would be more or less linked to what we have learned as being constructive? And I'll just walk you through some of them, but the first statement, the main weakness that I'd like for you to focus on is your lack of administrative detail. You never submit paperwork on time, or I didn't want to give you this rating, but I had no choice given our system. Like the second one, the first one is not related to the core statement. The second one is blaming the system. So I had no choice, given how our system works, is not I want to give you this as a gift, but I have to do it because I have no choice, which is not a good start. John, I noticed that this month your team has made on average half the sales calls they should, and as a result, our sales are 20% below budget now. Getting better, maybe it's but not again the overall bigger picture maybe that you show. While the last one, John, I noticed that this month the team has made an average only half of the sales calls they should, and also our sales are 20% below budget. If we do not achieve the budget, it may lead to necessary cost reduction and restructuring. So again, this bigger picture is there and probably is much more interesting to start off the feedback conversation with this. Just a few examples, we have a lot more. So again, the impact is not clear on the first one, blaming the process on the second one, judging people on the third one, because let me just go back here. I should go back on that because I don't necessarily see in that statement a judging. And the fourth one is talking about the core, which is really there with the context this month, with the actual observation that you have not made the normal average of sales calls, and finally the impact that it has on the budget and the impact on possible cost reduction and restructuring as a result. Then finally, this is the template. So when we give some mini case and we ask to do a role play, we would ask people to just fill this out as an exercise to get a little bit more structured in their approach. And they would, for instance, here on the first part, talk about the good, my gift to you, but given with integrity. So I really want to help you. I want to develop you. You're an important member of the team. So it's time to give you feedback so we can all achieve the results on time and the right results. This is the good. We then talk about the core statement, which is contextual, observable, and result. This is a bit the bad and the ugly, but doesn't have to be ugly. So here you would say, look, during this meeting on July 5th, I observed this, and this would be the impact if we don't correct it. And then this is the reality, basically. So we're then going to start active listening. And on active listening, we basically ask questions like, how do you feel about this core observation? What is your feedback on that? Then we talk about, again, the goal. So what is the new behavior we should install? What are the options we have to get there? And what is the next step? And when can we actually review it? Or what is your commitment to actually make sure this behavior does not happen again, or that we do achieve the results like we expected? And at the end, again, to make it balanced, we also ask the people, do you have some feedback to give back to me? So always very powerful to end the conversation in that way. This is basically the structure of the program. So again, we go much deeper with cases, examples, and tools, and so on in the different modules. We have about 8 modules, video modules, and quizzes, and so on, that will be ready again by the end of this month and will be online on the site. And then also, again, these modules can be turned into simple live webinar, PPT, or training, and can even be with a train-the-trainer provided to a local facilitator who can go in and provide that training. So feedback as a gift, if it is given and received constructively. And before I go into a little bit of an update on where we are with the Cornerstone Leadership Academy, I do open the floor a bit here for questions and thoughts. Anyone? Nancy? No, I see. Let me try to open this up first for a minute.
Peter?
Yes.
It's Ian here, hello. Very comprehensive presentation that you've given us this afternoon. Who do you envisage would be the normal recipient of that presentation?
Yeah, so again, we have provided this to a number of organizations, and frankly speaking, I would say anybody in the organization can benefit from this, but especially the middle to senior level management. I'm not saying that the CEO has to sit in, although they could benefit too, but anyone on the management team, as I said, you would be surprised how difficult it is. But it's actually interesting if you start a training live and you would just give them an exercise to give feedback to each other and you see how they do it. I've had situations where a clear instruction and people would do a role play and just chat and say how nice, and it's nice weather and it's great and thank you for coming, and by the way, how is your family? And they don't get to the point. And you get out of the role play and no feedback has been provided because you're of damaging the relationship. So it's a tool that is valuable for anyone on a management level in the organization.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Anyone else?
Peter, it's Nancy Chu here.
Hi, Nancy.
Yes, just your comment on this, because I remember receiving some feedback training, quite a while ago, and it was recommended to use the sandwich effect. So especially if you've got something not very nice, that you need to address, but try to soften it a little by, like a sandwich, you have your 2 pieces of bread and in the middle you may have a piece of cheese. So start off with the bread at the top and say, you've done well, and on the whole, it's been acceptable results. However, there is one thing I would like to highlight and for you to consider quite seriously. And that's where the cheese comes in, the hard part, I would say, hard piece of cheddar. And then you would finish off this feedback with something soft again, so that the person doesn't go away with just, bitterness in their mouth. And it's really trying to keep the balance, but you've also managed to get the message across, which is the key thing. So what would be your comment on this, Peter?
Well, it's in the template. If you look at it, we start with the good, which is the first part of the sandwich. You then have the core observation, the bad and the ugly, and you listen to that carefully, which is softening it off already. That is the cheese. And at the end, you finish the conversation by saying, you can also give some feedback to me. You can open up. You can share anything you want with me. That's the other. And maybe you can say also in the end, look, under the will side, I'm glad that we have a solution here. And I really look forward to a great review next time. So in essence, your sandwich structure is there.
Right. Thank you for opening my eyes, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's just in a different way and it's a different term, but actually it's exactly the same process that you go through.
Right. I think it's a time of night over here as well. I'll need some toothpicks.
That's great. I mean, and it's great that you highlight it, because at least it gives me an opportunity to dig a bit deeper and show clearly what it means.
Oh, bless you, Peter. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, Peter. This is Lori. What I like about it is that a lot of the ideas that that we train with on communication skills, I think the fact that you have very clear slides and that you have a step-by-step building of the information and that people can practice it, I think that it's an idea that is well presented. And that I think that people would be receptive to it. Partly, I think the basis of it is respecting the person, to not soften something, but to not be judgmental. I think that's the basis of it, that we all have things to learn and that you've observed this and that you're offering a communication to bring it out in the open and for it to not be something to be shameful about. And I think that is what's happening, that's changing in the world too, is the demand for respect between people. And we've had all of these movements right now. And I think a lot of those movements, Black Lives Matter, all of these different aspects of it, it's based on how do we present ideas neutrally to give people some air in their life when they're dealing with people that have more power, your boss.
Yeah.
So I think it's really well done, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The other
Peter?
area, Peter. Go on,
Hello?
Robert. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes,
Hi,
Robert.
thank you.
Hi.
Peter, very good presentation. I'm an engineer, so by background, and the way you presented was very organized and very clear. If I may contribute, when I tell people about feedback, I say that feeding is an act of love, like a mother bird feeding its offspring. So feedback is giving that love back. So when you do it with love, it's a beautiful exercise. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'll share with you, it's not possible when you do this online, remote, virtual, but when we actually have a kind of classroom setting, we would ask people at the start of a workshop, we actually have a gift card, and we ask the teams to write something nice about each other and really present it as a gift card to each other. But to get into the habit, again, it's like the sandwich Nancy said, but to start with something beautiful and really give it as a gift, how to develop somebody else. Thank you. Anyone else?
I was just thinking, Robert, that reflecting what you've just said, that feedback becomes really good when it becomes peer feedback, and where people are giving this gift of love to each other, and that really strengthens teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, when you ask people in the room, who would not like that somebody is really giving you constructive feedback to help you develop and to get rid of your blind spots? Who would not like that? There is not one single person that says, I don't like this. Everybody wants to have it. And the reality is also, the higher you get in the organization, the more difficult it is to get it. So, that's why also the last question about give me some feedback as the boss is very powerful, because you really create a habit to say, it's not only my feedback to you, but please also give me feedback, because it's so rare to get it. Okay, anyone else? Otherwise, I want to just share with you just a few 2 minutes where we are with the Leadership Academy overall, because we do have
Peter,
some exciting things happening.
Peter,
Yeah.
this is Aloysius here. Can I just ask one question here?
Yes, please.
On feedback itself, have you touched on the topic whereby during the feedback you get challenges and confrontation during the feedback? What do you do with it?
Well, again, it's then going back to the trick, right? It's about regulating emotions, showing integrity. The reality is, if you really show respect and keep that respect, and don't start to blame and judge and be biased and show your emotions and your behaviors, the chance is very high that the other person is still gonna get more at ease, and you're just gradually going to get more and more open conversations. Of course, if you don't observe that yourself, it's going to escalate, and then there is nothing you can do. It's better to stop the meeting and say, let's all reflect on this, and let's have another conversation in the next days or next hours or so. Is that answering your question?
Yes, good point. Thanks.
Yeah. So, okay, because of the sake of time for everyone too, and I do appreciate all the questions, but also want to share with you what's happening with the Leadership Academy. And there is a site up, and I really want this to be linked to the Global Cornerstone site. I think I will further discuss this with Chris, but we just want to show it now as how it can look like here. So we have developed a site on Cornerstone Leadership Academy, developing wise and responsible leaders. And we have the pain points that we address, the solutions we have, and then you can't see it here, but it's about the benefits and rewards for organizations. We also presented, I'm going to close this down again, if I can. Okay, sorry for that. So we have designed it really as a journey. So you can, and this, we're talking here about MVP assessment, but it doesn't have to be MVP assessment. As a matter of fact, we also have a good partnership now, which I will come back on later, but with the ROC in Germany, and we can do a lot of stuff to customize according to the program's assessments to have a view on the behaviors and the gaps that an organization or an individual has, before we start. You then have an online program which can be taken fully at your own time, your own pace, online. We then include a live webinar session where after you go through the program, you can have a conversation with me or some other mentors that we have on the faculty and really ask your questions, go deeper into the program during these sessions. And finally, there could be some team facilitation or other way virtually, globally, to connect and to learn together based on certain cases or real action learning type challenges that you face every day. So it's kind of a journey. At the end of the journey, if you follow a certain number of mentorships, we will give you a kind of masterclass certificate in leading change or providing feedback and so on under the Cornerstone Leadership Academy. So this is definitely possible. Finally, I'm gonna go to the next slide. This is the site that is up now, where you, and actually what I will do is, because I got some idea that also discussed actually with Larry just last week, but I would like to give every Cornerstone office globally some free vouchers to have one of the programs for themselves, but also provide it free to some of the clients as a kind of a gift. So for instance, Leading Change program and feedback by the end of the month, sorry, it's not on here yet, but it's somewhere below. But so these two programs that are already there, we could give free vouchers to say, hey, to your clients, have a look at it. This is your gift. Thank you for closing the last project. And by the way, here is an extra gift. You get this program for free. You can do it for yourself, or you can give it to some of the people on your team to have a look at that and get a certificate. So again, these are some of the programs that we will have all before the end of the year: Leading Change, Leadership in a Connected World, Fair Process Leadership, Strategic Thinking in a VUCA World, Feedback, VQ, and so on. Right now, the people I have been talking to weekly to design further, because I also want on this site not just my work, but also some of our other community members to share their content and their leadership programs. So I'm talking to Karsten Ohrmann from Germany and Simon Nord from the UK, and they have graciously accepted to be part of my design team, and really together we build more and more of these programs as we go. Having said that, we also envision part of the site to be the real faculty, where we want to select a few mentors that really can help us to do virtual webinars, mentorship, facilitation of these programs, that will be trained on these programs, and that can globally help us to deliver. And we think about, for instance, some people in North America. We were looking at maybe one person in Singapore. We're having China, obviously, and then a few people that are already there in UK or in Europe to help us deliver. The good thing about this is, because it's very modular, it's e-learning, it's at the same time live with webinar and potentially face-to-face in a team setting. So it's really virtually available globally. And it's very scalable, because you can just say 10 people on the team, watch the program, join the live webinar, and then do some individual virtual mentorship as you go. So it's providing content, facilitation, and coaching all combined. And this one, I don't want to spend too much time, but I can send you later. But I'm really thinking hard, what is the value that we can bring to the SEEK executive search offices on this, that may not be too familiar with leadership development, but we really see two targets. One is candidates, and on the other side, clients. And candidates, it would be also very powerful maybe to connect with passive candidates that are in our database, but we haven't really connected with them. Often they're just a resume there. But you could offer these people, for instance, a voucher with a discounted a program to develop themselves. So it's a gift to them to say, hey, great, we're back in touch. And by the way, we don't forget you. Here's a small gift to keep you developing as a leader in whatever situation you are right now. For clients, same thing. So you could reconnect by offering online and virtual leadership solutions And again, we're definitely willing to help you, to support you, also to give some more branding to the site, and offer you some free vouchers to connect with clients and people. I give you one example. I got a contact recently from Singapore office, Cornerstone, who said, look, we have a request from a client. I'm not going to mention the client here right now, but saying, look, can you help us? They want leadership development. Well, we've given them a free voucher to the program, and they can look at it, and it's the best way to experience and say, yes, that's what I want, or what can you do for me? So again, there is traction. I think in the next months, we'll have more and more programs, and by the end of the year, we will be ready with Cornerstone Leadership Academy. Thank you all for listening. Any thoughts on this one, maybe, before we log off?
Oh, that sounds very great, really. It can open a lot of doors.
Thank you, Vijay.
Yeah,
And again,
good.
what we also try to do, Vijay, is, and I appreciate, because I actually would really love to have a call rather than a call with everybody around here, but a few people that are really interested to work with this. I would love to connect one-on-one and talk and see, you know, how it can help you, how we should change, what we can improve, and build something also that is really designed to bring value to you. We don't want this to skyrocket fast. We want this to go slow but steady, and to have the first successes with people that we can really add value to. And as we grow the success, I think other people will come on board and say, yes, this is something we can use. We understand better now what value it can bring. So step by step. But if you are interested, pop me an email and we'll talk very soon.
Sure, sure.
Anyone else?
Peter, it's Nancy again. Would you be
Nancy?
very generous and sharing this deck of slides with us?
No problem. Definitely. I'll send it. I can send it via the link of Tammy, or I send it to Tammy. She forwarded. I'm not sure what's best, but definitely no problem.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Really good.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
So apologies for the delay. I learned my lesson too. You can give me feedback on that. But I'll just be on the call 10 minutes before instead of the last minute. But I really appreciate all your support and being here, and I hope we can continue to add value as we move forward with this. Thank you.
Yeah, well done. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well done, Peter.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Bye.